The next Elder Scrolls game is actually only a month away because they're re-releasing Skyrim yet again, but the next new Elder Scrolls game is still years away. We're still over a year away from Starfield, and the next Elder Scrolls game might be 3 to 4 years after that even. Although with that said, there still is a ton of great new Elder Scrolls content on the horizon, this mostly thanks to modders. Over the past few months to a year, Skyrim has been really hitting its stride. We've been getting some incredible mods, adding in amazing new features, and really just adding in a lot of content on top of the game in general, and there's a lot more on the horizon. That's why in this video I wanted to look at some of the large-scale mods on their way to Skyrim, including what are likely some of the biggest mods that will ever release for this game. And since Skyrim is now approaching a decade old, and many of these mods actually did begin work closer to the release of the game, some of them are actually getting pretty close to release, as several of the things we're talking about in this video do have a projected release date for 2021. Now, of course, with mod projects, we never know if that's going to come to fruition, but hey, even if they end up missing 2021, 2022 is not even that far away, and there's just a lot to look forward to all around. With that in mind, one of the first projects I want to take a look at is probably one of the biggest ones out there right now, and that is Skyblivion. As what this project is doing is basically recreating slash remastering slash adding on top of Oblivion as a whole. Oblivion being the Elder Scrolls 4, of course, the game before Skyrim. Over the past year or so, they started to post dev diaries documenting their progress, and in addition, they've actually posted several gameplay demos where you can see quests fully active and this new and transformed world. And one of the things that I think is really cool about this project is they're not only trying to recreate what was there in Oblivion, but also trying to update some of the things along the way. The various world regions will be a bit more diverse and have more of their own character. So for example, you'll see a bit of a more vibrant world with Skyblivion than may have appeared in Oblivion, and a lot of this is because Oblivion, when it was made years ago now, did have a lot of technical restrictions. But now, when they're porting things over to the Skyrim engine, they can just do way more. And it's not like they're trying to create something completely different. They're still trying to stay true to that Oblivion vision, and even with several of these kind of redefined areas, they are referencing that original concept art to again try and stay as true and lore friendly as possible. So as you can see, in some cases, it's literally just more foliage, actually making the landscapes a bit more vibrant and pretty and have more going on. But there's also things like more detailed interiors, some of the stores actually reflecting what they have on sale, homes being laid out or designed with the homeowner's degree of wealth in mind, so that's actually reflected in what's shown in the home. And with dungeons, they're actually adding in more diversity to the dungeons and even making them more representative of how characters speak about certain locations. So looking back at that concept art, looking at the lore and character dialogue itself, actually recreating some of these dungeons to be more interesting. And perhaps one of the best examples of this ideology of not only rebuilding but improving things is the city of Leyawiin. As the city itself does still remain pretty true to its original version, but it also got quite a bit of an overhaul. It now does feature surrounding farmsteads on the outside because, of course, it's a city, it needs to actually feed its people. The inside is redesigned based on some of the concept art to functionally make more sense, implementing sea routes and actually dividing it into 3 distinctive districts. And there is an immense attention to detail here. They're not cutting corners. And just as one simple example of that, they went as far as to actually recreate some of the Oblivion landscape textures rather than just reusing the ones from Skyrim. And although reusing the assets from Skyrim would be a lot easier, they weren't exactly what was there with Oblivion and didn't exactly match that vision, so they just remade the old ones instead. And with this, they've really done a phenomenal job at updating some of the weapons, armors, and clothes. But some of the armors in particular, it's a real massive visual upgrade over what we had before. Oblivion's old, and this really shows just how much of an upgrade we have going to the Skyrim engine. But at this point in the project, they've recreated nearly every weapon and armor set in Oblivion right now. They've also spent quite a bit of time refining and iterating on the UI. They've concluded that doing an almost hybrid UI between Skyrim and what you had before in Oblivion is really just the best approach, and I think it looks really good. It does stay pretty true to form. As you can see, it's clearly inspired by Oblivion's UI, but it also just looks good. And further, major progress on quests has also been made. As I mentioned before, we've actually seen some gameplay of some of these quests quite functional, as well as all the other things that have already been redone in the background, whether it be the landscape, houses, armors, clothes, etc. They actually developed a tool to implement these quests, and although many require further refinement, they recently hit a major milestone with numerous quests at the very least being startable in the current build. And it seems like it's been since then that they've been able to share so much additional gameplay of some of these quests in action. If that's not evidence that things are progressing quite nicely, I don't really know what else would be. And perhaps one of the more difficult aspects about all of this, they're also implementing some of those unique to Oblivion features, such as spellcrafting or underwater combat. Spellcrafting in particular was described as something that seemed implausible, but just recently we got a video that one of the developers did get things working, and as a result, it is back on the menu as a potential feature. There's quite a bit complete already with this project, and before long, we will be able to get our hands on it. The team right now describes crafting a public roadmap to make the journey to the end a bit more predictable, and we could actually see what stages are next. But that actually isn't all. The people behind this are known as the TES Renewal team, and they're also working on a full remake of Morrowind. They're already building some of the biggest cities of Morrowind. And of course, as a result, we've seen a ton of screenshots, progress updates from that team also. And in addition to that, they tout recreating over 100 tombs and dungeons in the past year. And just like with Skyblivion, they are updating these and trying to add more to them, but still trying to stay true to what was there originally. And overall with this project, they've been working on that modernization progress. But of course, with Skywind, it's quite a bit more of a challenge because Morrowind's a notably older game than even Oblivion. So they've been implementing some of the more modern features like NPC schedules, alternate ways to complete quests, whether it be via your intuition, dialogue choices, or even skills, and even adding things like random encounters into the world. Overall, I found myself to be a pretty big fan of this approach, actually taking what we had before and updating it, but also adding in a bit of flavor, trying to modernize it a bit along the way, and when you can, improve things. And based off what we've seen thus far, what the team's been delivering both in some of the concept art, shared images, and of course those really phenomenal developer diaries, it all looks like it is coming together super nicely and looks incredible. This is going to be one of those projects I think that is going to really hit well on two fronts. On one hand, the nostalgia effect for those who have played these games in the past, and really even those who get to experience them for the first time. There's a lot of people that don't want to touch Morrowind or Oblivion just because they are so damn old and they can't get into them after going from Skyrim or Fallout. But even further, for those who have played them in the past, actually getting to re-experience these worlds with a bit more modernization. Some of those creature comfort features or just cool things all around, I think will be a pretty special experience when we finally get our hands on it. They also are recruiting, so I will have links to all of their social media and where you could find out more for yourself down below. Naturally, I just scratched the surface of some of the content they posted online, in particular with Skywind. But that said, that's just one of the large scale and major mod projects on the way. And one of the other ones that always kind of follows up when you talk about Skyblivion or Skywind is of course Beyond Skyrim. And I actually think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know the difference at a glance of these two projects. Are there two Oblivion remasters or remakes on the way? And no, not exactly. So at this point, I'm sure and hopefully you do realize or know that Skyblivion is a remake of Oblivion. But Beyond Skyrim, or more specifically Beyond Skyrim Cyrodiil, which is going to be taking on the location of Oblivion, and is actually more specifically known as Cyrodiil, the seat of the Sundered Kings, is a separate project that is going to take you back to Cyrodiil at the time of Skyrim. Skyrim takes place 200 years after the events of Oblivion, and that's really the entire theme of Beyond Skyrim. It's taking on all of the various provinces that you can find in Tamriel and did experience in some past games, and even some ones that we haven't experienced all that much, and is implementing them at the time of Skyrim. So for many of these, hundreds of years have passed. Things are completely changed, while some of the things may have actually stayed surprisingly the same. So it's actually a pretty unique and interesting project. I don't know of any other mod teams doing something like this. Those old stories are complete, and now you'll be able to return to the familiar setting, but there will be a totally new people there. Might be descendants of people we've interacted with in the past, but we'll be experiencing completely new stories, facing new challenges, and just seeing how that world evolved oftentimes after our actions were set in place with the original story we participated in. And what we're looking at with Beyond Skyrim Cyrodiil, the main quest or story is, following the collapse of the Emperor's reign, factions across Cyrodiil are vying against one another to seize the throne. We join this struggle and have to decide who to crown the new Emperor of Tamriel. And of course, as a project, we already have had the opportunity to experience somewhat, as Beyond Skyrim does this thing where, with some of the major projects, they release a small subset of it early. So a few years ago now, we did get Beyond Skyrim Bruma, which is the first glimpse at this remade Cyrodiil at a more modern time, the time of Skyrim. And while the city of Bruma is already released and playable, they've also been making wonderful progress in some of the other cities, as they shared some live streams of them exploring both outside outside and inside Bravel, doing some quests here, showing just how much has actually been implemented, even just on the quest front. And as you could hopefully see at least somewhat in the background, it's kind of an interesting one from a creative approach, because on one hand, you are recreating something. The landscape is largely going to be similar or almost exactly the same in some instances, but on the flip side, you're creating totally new stories in that familiar place. But even to build on this, they actually describe how you'll see some characters that are descendants from characters in Oblivion. Some of the cities in the game have undergone more drastic changes. It's been 200 years, which for some places is a massive amount of time, but for some other cities, they've actually remained largely the same. With some of these places, that inbuilt culture is already hundreds of years old, so another couple of hundred years didn't really change much. And with this, you could see numerous quests already implemented in a complete modernization of Bravel itself, as it really just does look so good. And with this, you could actually see some evolution, some of the areas of the world that have been more built up on. People have actually moved in and continued to build in that area. What was before just a singular small inn actually now has things built up around it, quests to do there. You can see some of the familiar enemies of the region that of course are still there, like minotaurs, and even things like dungeon crawling with a bit more of a modern touch, similar to what the Skyblivion team is doing, actually taking some of those dungeons but modernizing them along the way. And further, they've actually been quite active in sharing images of some of the various world space progress, from nature to some of the major locations, with images of most of the major cities to appear, and it really just looks amazing. It's exciting to be able to recognize the familiar but also the different. As I mentioned before, there's a really unique and interesting concept to on one hand get to revisit these locations, and you kind of have that nostalgia effect of seeing them reimagined but still being quite familiar, but at the same time you get to do something completely different there. And of course, it's not just some of those locations that have been reimagined. We also do have a ton in the way of weapons, armors, and of course some of those enemies that I did show a bit of before. But one of the pretty cool parts about this project overall is in the scope. We're just talking about Cyrodiil right now, but there's actually several provinces that are currently in production. This is really an interconnected project, whether it be teams sharing assets or even a team member cheating on their team to help work on another one for a little while, with the eventual goal being that you'll be able to walk to and from each of the various provinces, basically creating Skyrim as a hub game, and then you could just walk to all these other places and experience DLC-sized expansions. So naturally, Cyrodiil is one of the larger provinces that are being undertaken with this, but one of the smaller ones that is a bit closer to release is Roscria, with Beyond Skyrim Roscria, as it was recently described as being in its late stage development. Roscria is a mysterious island off the coast. Previously, both the Empire and Solitude attempted to conquer the island for its mithril, but you could find some of the inhabitants on the island but remains from those battles of past. The design and culture here being a bit more unique, as of course this is an island. It's a bit more isolated and they have developed things independently. And the Beyond Skyrim team even went as far as to create their own unique cave textures for the different rocks that would appear here. Some of the enemies wearing unique bronze armor from Roscria's past, actually being representative of that past in culture. Based on what has been shared thus far, it seems like this will be an island with a bit of its own identity, not completely disconnected from the rest of Tamriel as trade has been ongoing, but still a place with its own unique set of armors to suit its narrative needs, and a place that will pose its own unique types of threats. Thus far, a ton of amazing work has been done to really create and imagine this identity for the island, as part of it is still maintained and ruled by natives, while another part does have influence from outside forces. And that's really just a glimpse at two of these projects, one of the larger scale and one a bit on the smaller scale by comparison. They've been doing amazing work thus far. It's really such an ambitious and exciting concept and mod, especially with how much they have done already. But with all this thus far, we've been looking beyond Skyrim, lands that are both familiar and new, and how modders are editing or improving on them. But there also is a pretty exciting mod that is potentially coming out later this year that is a reimagination of Skyrim itself, that with Skyrim Extended Cut. Late last year, we saw the announcement of Skyrim Extended Cut, and really at its core, it's planned as a main quest overhaul for Skyrim. It's going to do things like expand the entire third act of the game, tying in the Dragonborn main quest to the vanilla Skyrim main quest, and even some of the side quests will impact the main quest, some characters becoming more fleshed out, as well as new things and fundamentally new features. As of late last year, with their full reveal and announcement, they were hoping to release the mod in 2021 for both PC and Xbox One. Is that still happening? Obviously, with any mod project, regardless of scale, release date is typically pretty in the air. Most people are doing this in their free time volunteering, and at its core, it's really not quite on the scale of Skyblivion or even even some of the larger Beyond Skyrim projects. It is an expansion, or almost really an edit of the main quest of Skyrim to add further refinement, but also more player impact and choice, which will sometimes yield even further involvement with some familiar factions, like for example the Blades seem like they have a much heavier role here, as well as new or even overhauled locations. Northwind Keep is going to be a place you'll be able to call home, your own customizable home at that. But along the way, they've been sharing quite a bit in the way of the custom assets that will come with this, whether it be those full-on locations or even just armors/weapons. Custom features are coming too though, like the soul nature system. It's almost similar to a karma system of sorts, but basically based on your actions, you'll actually get new dialogue choices and impact on your character build and or stats. So what you do in the world will have a larger impact both on the story and really how you play, what you're good at and what you're bad at. And overall to me, I want to highlight this one because it does seem like it's going to be a pretty special mod, implementing a range of new features and options in vanilla Skyrim story while still maintaining the overarching aspects of the story. They released this image not too long ago to really show you the various acts that will be present with this one. You can see how things are divided up and how some things do remain the same while some other things are a bit different or added upon. But on one hand, I think it's going to be really cool to get to go back into Skyrim and have a lot of the familiarity of the story. You kind of know the major beats, but a lot of the differences in the nuance there, additional options, different routes you can take, that in and of itself seems like a huge option because at the end of the day, this game's about to be a decade old. Most of us have played the game at least once. You probably know some of the major things that happen. So having a change up on that and the novelty of it should be a pretty cool experience, but also just as a backbone to a truly custom and modded Skyrim experience. There's a lot of mods out there right now that are adding atop of Skyrim. Actually, everything I just talked about in this video is technically adding atop of Skyrim in one way or another, but it's very rare to get a mod that actually edits what's there already as far as the story content or that main quest does go. You can overhaul locations, you could overhaul visuals, and even things down to armors and weapons, but this is shaping up to be the first proper expansion-sized experience that will overhaul the main story, make that actually different and hopefully quite a bit better. Plus again, it does seem like they are getting closer and closer to release, and even if it misses 2021, 2022 is not that far. It's definitely one of those ones to look forward to. And also just as an added bonus, as I mentioned, actually creating a fully custom and modded Skyrim, this will have integrations with several other mods out there, so mods will synergize with this quite well, allowing for that truly custom and modded experience. But then for the fourth major project I want to take a look at, we do have Apotheosis, which thus far is shaping up to be the most distinctive or different compared to all of the other projects I have talked about. Most of what we've looked at thus far is really an extension of the familiar. It's building atop of that familiar Skyrim or Oblivion or Morrowind note and really just adding to it. But with Apotheosis, we see how modders are seeking to take Skyrim to totally new places and actually exploring darker and more arcane themes. As at its core, Apotheosis is going to be a new DLC-sized or expansion-sized quest mod that will take players to the 16 Daedric realms of Oblivion and Dreamsleeve, which is the home of the Forgotten Dead. And throughout all of this, you're going to have to navigate your way around or through the 17 Daedric princes that are there, as each of them does hope to overcome death. The experience is described as a darker and harder one. You'll face off against bosses, overwhelming odds against you, and difficult mechanics, but you will have powerful rewards if you are successful in the forms of artifacts, weapons, armor, spells, and more. It does feature a fully voiced main and side quest, and it's actually pretty exciting because the last update, which came out just a few months ago now, describes how this too is entering into the final stages of development, about how it could be around 90% complete at that point. Seems like they may be targeting a 2021 release date, but of course, with mod projects, as I mentioned before, we don't know how true that ends up being. As far as a couple of the cool and unique things coming with this one, the main and side quests in this experience are interconnected. Your decisions in one may impact your choices in the other. A key character you will encounter during this are the various Daedric princes, as I mentioned before, and the way you actually get past them, deal with them, or even ally with them is up to you. You have a lot of choices here, and even you could just fight them if you want a true challenge. And with this mod, with it being designed as a true DLC to Skyrim, what options are actually available to you at certain points can be influenced by decisions you made in Skyrim previously. The ultimate goal throughout all of this is reassembling the heart of Lorkhan, and which order you take with these steps to get there is totally up to you. It really seems like it's being designed as one of those mods where it's going to throw you into this new, unique, and interesting world, and how you choose to get out of it is up to you. You'll have the tools at your disposal, and quite a few tools at your disposal, and you'll have to overcome some of those challenges with various methods that are created for the player. And speaking of some of those tools you'll have at your disposal, during some of the side missions, you'll have opportunities to actually save characters from the Dream Sleeve, who will in turn help become your allies and perhaps make the entire thing easier along the way. But who you save or don't save is going to be completely up to you. Not to mention the absolutely striking art and level design, as you can see from both the trailers and some of the images shared thus far. You can see some resemblance to some of the darker places and sides of Skyrim, but this looks like it's really going to be a truly memorable and unique experience in the world and the design overall. And just from the screenshots, you can see the sheer amount of custom content being created to shape this out. Creatures to weapons and armors, and even just some props to fill it all in. But with that said, that is a look at some of those DLC-sized or even new game-sized new projects on their way to Skyrim. With this video, I wanted to highlight some of the larger scale ones, some of the biggest mods on the horizon, but then also some still massive projects that are perhaps going to be a bit closer to release. Ones that maybe it'll be the last time I talk about them in an upcoming nature, and the next time we touch on them, we'll actually be playing them or posting a review or showcase of what they add in. Either way though, with all of this, the Skyrim modding scene is truly hitting its stride right now, hitting a next level. Over the past year, we have seen an immense amount of content and an immense amount of progress made in some of these large scale mods. Some of these reportedly have dev teams that are exceeding 100 people working on them at one time. That's insane. That's literally more people than worked on Skyrim originally. On the horizon, even just a bit sooner, we do have Bethesda's take on a Skyrim DLC of sorts. We are getting Skyrim Anniversary Edition in a little over a month now. Before then, I hopefully will have a couple of videos talking more about Skyrim, some of those amazing mods you could download right now, but the Anniversary Edition is shaping up to be interesting. Seems like there's going to be a ton of new content from Creation Club, except it's not on Creation Club, you just kind of get it with the Anniversary Edition, but it looks like there'll be hours of new content, perhaps even tens of hours, depending on how large some of these things end up being. So it should be a super interesting next couple of months for Skyrim, as we see more updates to some of these large scale mods, you see some of these things start getting released, and even Bethesda's attempt at almost releasing a DLC of their own. And I'm sure with the release of the Anniversary Edition, there'll be a whole reinterest in Skyrim itself from modders and fans alike. But with that said, as always again, I thank you all for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you found it informative. If you liked anything I talked about, I have links to everything down below. If you want to check out some of these mods, if you think you have a skill or talent that can be applicable here, you can join the projects, help progress things even a bit quicker. But with that said, as always again, I thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.